Well, the others, the speaker before me said that she was talking to the converted. I'm assuming that I'm not talking to the converted, at least on what I would be talking about. What I will say today, it covers the decade in general, what we have learned, but it is a lot based on my experiences, direct experiences of living and working in Afghanistan at the Canadian Embassy for 3 years, 2003 to 6, and also since then, I travel to Canada about 4 times a year, and I work directly with the government people, NGOs, and other communities. And a lot of the experiences I've gained from that is reflected in this, as well as my academic research, theoretical research, and attendance in conferences, etc. I will focus on lessons learned in Afghanistan internationally. As a member of the international community, Canada shares these lessons. However, I have included some concrete Canada-specific examples as well. I also begin with the alert that given the enormity and depth of the issues involved in this subject area and the time limit I'm given, my analysis, regrettably, will also be limited and less comprehensive than desirable. Since interdependence of development and stabilization of Afghanistan through containment of conflict is the central issue we are grappling with for more than a decade, my analysis of the lessons learned is intrinsically based on security development nexus and the linked operation of the international community in Afghanistan. The lessons that I have identified are based on the query, why is Afghanistan facing renewed violence and conflict and a resurgent Taliban movement, detrimental to development advances? The lessons learned package I will present is founded on the hypothesis that it is not the strength of the Taliban, but weakness of the counterinsurgency and security operations and less than relevant development programming that have limited the success of the international community's mission in Afghanistan. I move to the lessons learned, and I will let you surmise validity of this assertion. Lesson 1. Attention deficiency disorder must be avoided for sustaining a win in a war and to prevent reoccurrence of conflict. Sustained intelligence operation must be given a priority. Unfortunately, the quick victory in the war of 2001 was not followed up with an in-depth analysis of the potentials of sustainability of the success or plans to systematically prevent Taliban resurgence. Along with President George Bush's shifting focus to Iraq, a complacency and smugness developed, with the international forces paying little attention, I would say international community in general, paying the attention to pursuit of intelligence gathering on the expelled Taliban activities or on the regional sanctuaries provided to the Taliban. This claim that Pakistan played a role in destabilizing Afghanistan is well grounded, yet this thorn was not detected at Bonn or the years following, at least until 2005 or 6. Intelligence was absent on the destabilizing activities in Afghanistan's border. The potentials of threats and or support from the regional powers were somewhat neglected. No strategies were adopted by the international community in a timely fashion to coordinate their efforts and work with Afghan, Pakistani, and other regional leaders to put aside the differences and develop a comprehensive military and political strategy to address the Taliban threat on both sides of the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. The Taliban took advantage of the negligence of the superior powers and started resurgence on both sides of the border. Further, on the failure of intelligence services, millions were spent in the years following the war of 2001 on random civil military reconstruction efforts without concentrating support without concentrating the efforts on sensitive areas where insurgencies were brewing and were taking advantage of the complacency of the international community, the Taliban gradually re-strengthened. By 2005, when the Canadians took control of the Kandahar Provincial Reconstruction Team, or the PRT, the Kandahar city, district, towns, and highways remained insecure, as they do today. Lesson 2. As a corollary to Lesson 1, to be relevant, look before you leap. Take into account complexities of the situation before longer-term entrenchment. Well-founded background knowledge and training of the staff working in complex situations are absolute necessities. A quick decision was no doubt necessary to join the war, yet follow-up ground research was also necessary to back up our continued involvement in a country to which Canada was somewhat of a stranger. One of the most important conditions to be fulfilled in such situation is an in-depth knowledge of the work context. This includes a sound analysis of the interests of all actors and stakeholders, particularly when social conflicts are at stake. Accurate analysis must be prepared on the history of the causes of the conflict, the military and political zones of influence of the conflicting parties, regional influences, and the existing risks. The demands made on project staff in fragile post-conflict states are extremely complex. It is therefore essential that the staff assigned is well-trained to address conflict-sensitive issues and have many years of experience in development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. Indiscriminate assignment of civilian staff is of little use. There is little indication of efforts made by our government to address these requirements. As a result, our mission was guided by no long-term vision. There was simply no strategy and no planning to address the question, what after the war, to turn around a fragile post-conflict state to stability. Hardly any thought was put into the establishment of the first Canadian embassy in Kabul in August of 2003. Given that the embassy was established 1.5 years after the entry of the Canadian troops into the country, the excuse of inadequate time available for planning to guide our representational office's operation in a complex country does not hold ground. The testimonial of total neglect of the analysis of the seriousness of the undertaking was well reflected in the assignment of only 4 Canadians, an ambassador, a political officer, a CEDA representative, and an administration officer, with no CSIS presence in a complex country where Canada had never been active. While the theoretical precinct of 3 Ds, defense, diplomacy, and development, was accepted and were being parroted, no strategy for addressing these issues in a coordinated fashion in the long term was developed to help the staff deliver. When Canada's embassy was established in 2003, $150 million was allocated for development. No strategic plans to integrate the 3 Ds in Canadian operation had yet been prepared by the government. No priorities were set and no investment plans made by CEDA for programming $150 million of development aid based on a 3 Ds approach. I will not add to the ever-compiling talks and writings on the subject of the lack of wisdom involved in Canada's decision to take over the Southern Command and the Kandahar Provincial Reconstruction Team without appropriate analysis of the ground conditions and Canada's own resource capability. Linked Lesson 3. 2 prerequisites, especially applicable to civilian operation of the international community in fragile states, are proximity to the local population and extensive networking, which are fundamental for promoting effective cooperation and efficient operation. These prerequisites prerequisites help promote understanding of the country, its people and culture, and thus their needs and priorities that are necessary foundations and foundations for need-based planning, programming, implementation, and realistic monitoring. Such modes of operation help gain credibility, respect, recognition, trust of the local government counterparts, local staff, the target beneficiary groups, and help raise the visibility and profile of a country engaged in a foreign mission. Canada's fulfillment of these prerequisites was recognized by the Afghan government prior to Canada's move to Kandahar by offering it the role of coordinating the external advisory group of donors for the Afghanistan National Development Strategy, which is their poverty reduction strategy. Canadian Defence Staff role in Afghanistan's strategic advisory team earned a profile for Canada across the government. These achievements and lessons learned from them are now archived. There is also evidence that these elements result in better protection and safety of the staff. Instead, international community's practice of staying locked down in compounds for extended periods at the slightest security threat results in losing contacts with people and reality and promotes neutralization of the field office and its staff. Lesson 4. If the objective in a post-conflict country is durable cessation of conflict, a priority non-military component of giving opposition groups a stake in the post-conflict order must not be ignored. Non-recognition of the need for placating loser groups immediately following cessation of conflict often paved the path for reoccurrence of severe conflict. A linked lesson learned is that missed opportunities to leverage weakness of the enemy immediately after its defeat hobbles long-term strategic gains. It has been accepted internationally that the Afghan mission is not solely a military mission for killing the Taliban, even if it was the original objective. The course of events, mainly declining security, with resurgence of the Taliban, has led to the recognition of the need to promote a process of reconciliation with the Taliban, provided that the democratic constitution and rights of the women are not compromised. Post-conflict peace-building experiences show that the durable cessation of conflict measures aimed at placating the loser groups is a priority. The loser group was the Taliban in 2001. Being in a weak position, the defeated Taliban would have been more pliable in accepting proposals set forth by the winning party. The mistake was to reject any attempt for reconciliation at the time. After several years, acceptance, under dire conditions, of the need for reconciliation lets the Taliban negotiate from a position of strength and makes several folds difficult a just settlement not detrimental to the Afghan population. The next 3 lessons, 5, 6, and 7, basically associated with strategic decision-making and planning for investment in a post-conflict state, are interlinked. Lesson 5. Unstrategic investments and random actions are detrimental to objectives of stabilization. The investments that the international forces made through the provincial reconstruction teams turned out to be neither strategic nor visionary. The PRT projects failed to help the central government gain a presence in the South because the design and delivery of reconstruction were not through the government, but through parallel structures set up by individual donors and organizations. Canada continued this trend through the signature projects in Kandahar. The initial PRT investments of the international community mainly concentrated on civil-military cooperation or CIMIC activities focused on quick and visible impact projects like well digging, road construction, and even cash handouts, although Canada did not do that. The cash handouts wasn't done by Canada. Little attention was paid to longer-term development in basic education and health, youth training and job creation, building of a rudimentary justice system, and a functioning police force to ensure minimum physical security for citizens. Programming in these areas would have produced sustainable results in improving the conditions of people and retrieving citizen support for the new Afghan government. Some examples: for the international community, the conditions of the Bonn Agreement and election and establishment of democracy were the priorities. If democracy could be firmly grounded in the absence of appropriate governance structures was not considered. The vital agriculture sector, on which 70% of the population depend, was neglected, which led to a massive return to poppy cultivation by destitute farmers in the south, with the danger of a quick spread over the rest of the country. Less than strategic investments generated not only a development but also security and governance gap, while the government of Afghanistan and the international community moved haphazardly. Without a strategic plan, the Taliban rebuilt, taking advantage of the security vacuum and absence of the central or even the provincial government's presence. Lesson 6. Weak state institutions and weak governance in both military and civil arenas are destabilizing factors in a post-conflict country, fanning insurgencies. The international community, Canada inclusive, failed to appropriately attend to a very fundamental problem: the lack of state institutions capable of implementing a monopoly of power, unitary legal order, and service delivery to the public. Weak governance in the body of weak public institutions are not only incapable of countering insurgency, but they in fact feed insurgencies by allowing the insurgents to win over support of the public, frustrated with poor governance, law and order situation, and the absence of essential services. Following the expulsion of the Taliban and beginning of a new era, building of state institutions was the first essential for establishing the legitimacy of the new state of Afghanistan to win the loyalty, confidence, and support of the citizens. However, no coordinated institution building strategy was ever developed by the international community. Uncoordinated and poor quality of technical assistance intended to strengthen Afghan institutions continue to drain over 500 million of aid resources annually without sustainably strengthening the institutions. I had some examples I wanted to give, but because of lack of time, I will refrain from doing that. But the examples were one related to Afghanistan National Development Strategy and its virtual non-implementation because of lack of capacity in the government. And although the donors funded the ANDS or the strategy, they never tried to develop the capacity in the government. And the second one was on elections. We funded the Election Commission, but without really properly creating the capacity in the Election Commission. We have been funding them since 2006, and the 2009 election was a total fiasco. In the security sector, the international community's much acclaimed counterinsurgency efforts underestimated the importance of involvement of the indigenous actors. At least in the early years, the counterinsurgency strategy did not focus on improving the capacity of the indigenous government and indigenous security forces to wage counterinsurgency. The international armed forces would have had better chances of success in counterinsurgency warfare with the policy of strengthening the capacity of the local forces. The more capable and legitimate the indigenous security forces were, the better would have been the capacity of the local state in governance and in preventing Taliban aggression, local or external. The policy of training of Afghan National Army and police at the center of the transit strategy and the international community's exit strategy was introduced too late when the insurgency already strengthened several folds since 2001. I will just, without explaining, I will do two more lessons, sorry. Lesson 7 was drawn from lessons 5 and 6 is that solution to Afghanistan problems, including the insurgency, will remain unresolved until the broader human security issues are not treated as secondary priorities by leaders who believe in use of aid not for need-based development, addressing national priorities, but primarily to serve short-term political and military objectives. And the last one I will mention lesson 8, is actually there are 2 more lessons, but I'll just refrain, I think. Coordination was lacking in the international community's work. What I recommend is get out of scattered and fragmented programming and delivery, coordinate and harmonize and line up behind nationally designed and implemented programs. I'm very much in favor of supporting national programs and not programs developed by foreign countries or the international community. The last lesson is follow up and monitor earnestly commitments, announcements, and declarations. Establish realistic and clear results with indicators. Monitor progress and failures. Learn from lessons and integrate lessons learned in the way forward planning. And I had a list of a large number of projects that have failed, and it is not my conclusion that they have failed, but they have been evaluated by the UN and by independent commissions. And the failures, these projects were all funded by the international community. These failures are well documented. We never talk about them anymore. And what I have noticed as that Afghanistan is one of the highly meetingized countries in the world with more than 10, I think it's more than 10, international conference dotting the decade or 12 years. And we have been skating from one conference to the other, but leaving behind the declarations made and promises made, commitments made. And that can be good for both Afghanistan government and the Canadians. And this method must be stopped, and we have to follow up on what we have done and how we can go forward with lessons integrated. Thank you.